It's not surprising that one of the greatest anti-Semitic British politicians of the 20th century, Lord Balfour, is associated with the creation of the State of Israel. Lord Balfour is the one who initiated, between 1905 and 1906, a series of legislation in the House of Commons to try and prevent Jewish refugees from Eastern Europe to come and settle in Britain because of pure anti-Semitism. When the years pass by since the Balfour Declaration, we understand that actually you can be an anti-Semite and a great supporter of Israel. As you can be an evangelical Christian that believes in the return of the Jews and yet believe that their return would actually create a Christian reality. Because in both cases, you get rid of the Jews in your own vicinity. And that's the major impulse, the major drive. Then we come to the mid-1920s. This is when the British mandate changes the land regime in Palestine, that for many years allowed people to buy land and sell land without moving the tenants who lived on the land for centuries. The Zionist movement was the first buyer of land in Palestine that did not only want the land, but wanted also to remove the tenants who lived on the land. For that, it needed the British support, and Britain actively supported with the first ethnic cleansing operations, one can call it that way, in the mid-1920s, when the first Palestinian villages disappeared, long before 1948, due to the change of land regime, and in some cases the British police and army came to evict the Palestinians from the first plots of land that the Zionist movement has purchased in Palestine. But of course, the worst part of the British responsibility comes in 1948. When Britain is still responsible for law and order between November 1947 to May 1948, when, according to the mandatory charter, it has to respect the dignity, the life and property of everyone who lives in Palestine, under the eyes of British soldiers and sometimes with the help of British soldiers. The Zionist movement begins already in February 1948, a massive operation of ethnic cleansing, targeting, while the British are still responsible for law and order, the Palestinian cities. Not the Palestinian countryside, the Palestinian cities. Because they knew that in the Palestinian cities, you had the political elite, the cultural elite, the social elite. And if you cut the elite from the people, you leave them defenseless later on when the 15th of May comes and British forces leave Palestine and the Jewish state is declared. Under the eyes of British soldiers and commanders, and sometimes through their facilitation, the city of Haifa was emptied by force from all its 75,000 Palestinians. Similar fate awaited the people of Jaffa, Akka, Baisan, Safad. 11 Palestinian towns were depopulated in a way that reminds us of the depopulation of towns in the Middle East today after 2012. We were all horrified by the way some of the urban centers of Syria and Iraq and Libya and Yemen are destroyed from the air, how barrels of TNT are being thrown from aeroplanes. This was the fate of the Palestinian towns in a time when there was no television, when nobody filmed these things. But this was an herbicide, a genocide of towns that happened in 1 month, in April 1948, under the eyes of British officials and officers, and when Britain was still responsible for law and order. Some British politicians later on had some remorse about it, but obviously not enough, given the way British policy developed. And finally, and not less importantly, the behavior of Britain as a member of the EU, or the member of Europe, doesn't have to be the EU, a member of the West, with its record of involvement and complicity in the destruction of Palestine and the Palestinians. The behavior of that particular Britain in the end of the last century and in this century, where it could play a major role in defining a European position that shows responsibility for the fate of the Palestinians, especially at an age where we know exactly the nature of the crimes committed against the Palestinians, whether it is in the West Bank or in the Gaza Strip or in the Nakab, or the continued refusal to allow the Palestinian refugees to return. That this particular regime of British governments, doesn't matter from which party, has never seen its duty to be at the forefront of a European policy that would say we were the chefs that cooked an impossible formula for the Palestinians. We were behind the idea that in order to compensate the Jews of Europe for the Holocaust, we will help them to colonize Palestine and dispossess the Palestinians. Britain played a crucial role in bringing back Germany as a civilized nation after the Second World War, and did it with the help of Israel, which was the first state that recognized West Germany, because the quid pro quo was very clear. If you do that, you will have an unconditional support of Britain and Europe for the Zionist policies on the ground. That not one British politician until Jeremy Corbyn of a senior position in British politics, there were some marginal ones who did it, that not one senior politician in British politics was willing to challenge this horrific formula, apologize to the Palestinian people, and more importantly, formulate a policy that supports unconditionally the rights of the Palestinians for self-determination and independence, is a shameful stain in the history of this country. And I will finish and say it's not surprising that for the first time, when there is a senior politician who is a decent person, who fought all his life against racism and anti-Semitism and believes, sometimes very naively, in the equality of people and justice, it's not surprising that when such politician has the potential of becoming the leader of this country, Israel is using the Anglo-Jewish community to weaponize anti-Semitism in order to destroy a politician that can change not only Britain's policy towards Palestine, but also Europe's policy towards Palestine. The ridiculous allegation of anti-Semitism is only there because this is a moment of truth for Britain. It's not too late. I think that's the message that we get. It's not too late for Britain to feel accountable and responsible for the role it played in the destruction of Palestine and the dispossession of the Palestinians. And the Israelis rightly understand that once Britain would do this U-turn, once Britain would be willing to commemorate the Balfour Declaration as a horrendous crime and apologize rather than celebrate it, other countries in Europe would follow suit. And finally, we will have a proper counter position to the unconditional support of the United States to the State of Israel. So they know what they are doing in the Israeli Ministry of Strategy, as it's called. They do know what they are doing. Do we know what we are doing? By apologizing, by saying, no, yes, there is a rise in anti-Semitism, but it's not exactly our fault, and so on, instead of taking the initiatives. And every minute that we appear in the media, and we don't talk of Palestine, but we answer the stupid allegation of anti-Semitism, is a wasted minute of our time for a struggle that should continue. Thank you.